Hello there, my name is Devlin. Today we'll be examining podcasts, their structure, ethics, and sound. This first one is a very intriguing podcast and one of my favourites. The Living Room Podcast by Diane Weipert, a podcast that has had lots of controversy, but also lots of intrigue. It's popular, but how? How has it captivated and horrified the masses? How does it make itself so engaging and draw audiences into its narrative? We'll focus on how Diane Weipert begins her story, the most important component of a narrative, the intro, the opportunity for authors to hook their audience. We get greeted with the setting of our journey. You would expect it to be described in beautiful, lavish ways. It's as basic and normal as physically possible. It's drab and boring, basically. This allows us to visualize the environment and immerse the listener. Here, she allows us to feel the impact of any change. After all, she's been living there for 15 years, so we have as well. So, why does it feel different? Well, she uses a metaphor to describe the most simple change, the change that affects her life. The curtains are open, with a bright light shining through their window, like a movie screen. Worse than that, the instigating event is described as a domino effect. What causes this whole thing? Well, it used to be a living room. Then it dawned on me, what is it now? The drop, it's a bedroom. And then the turning point, they're having sex. That instantly attracts your attention. It even takes you back, re-listening to the clip. The interesting part for me is that after this came out, she didn't even need to worry about writing such a good hook. The conceptual ethics of Diane creepily staring at her neighbour's bedroom window for over a year already drew the attention of fans and critics. Let's continue. She describes elements of her day and what everyone did to combat this new threat. She tried shutting the curtains, for example. It has this mundane, calm before the storm-esque element. As an audience, we know story structure. She's used it in the intro. Something bad is going to happen. Then it hits us. The crisis. She wakes up one day to find the room empty for a whole week. The man was gone for long periods, and the sex stopped. Diane and her family continued living their own lives, and forgot about them for months. What this does is it sets up that mystery element. Like a detective drama, the audience starts to think, where did they go? A woman comes over, and Diane doesn't recognize her. Subsequently, we don't. They feel like an invader in Diane's story. This builds that mystery element. It's revealed, then the man and woman from before, warped by the elements in their lives. Diane pushes this across by describing them in a completely opposite manner as they were before. The man, skeletal and bald. The woman, chubby. It adds a feeling of dramatic irony if you know the signs of chemotherapy. Diane starts to speculate, and audiences can only fear the worst to come. Then, the man passes away, the music cuts out, and the resolution of the instigating event happens. The woman, left alone, meets Diane. This can be seen as Diane's reward for being with them. Diane does this a lot in the story. Why it's bad for her, why that's uncomfortable for her, how she had to shut the curtains. Although it's a side effect of her POV, it works as this one-way symbiosis between her and the couple. She envelops it as part of her life and makes this into something about her. This couple never knew her and never met her until the man died. If it occurred in real life, this would be sickening. Yet, we don't perceive it in that way when she's telling us. After all, she's an observer in the conflicts. Her assumptions are correct, and speculations elevate the story. You can perceive the impact of her involvement in the story's retelling by browsing social media. Places like Reddit have called her out for disgusting behaviour. However, I would argue that the story's main structure would have been ruined if it were not for the first-person perspective. We would only hear a story of how a couple broke apart, and although a Shakespearean tragedy, that wouldn't work that well as a podcast. Diane takes the conventions of telling her stories through a podcast and uses them to transform hers into a tragic story that has us feel what others would in the couple's lives. We hear it happen, which makes the feeling incredibly intimate, more than seeing it ourselves. This is proven in the movie. Many elements of the narrative are warped for the film. The POV elements are removed, the long periods are cut with a montage, and the fantasy feelings are completely removed. Although it was given Oscars by critics, it heavily missed the mark. Diane told this story perfectly, and use the conventions of podcasts in a way where the story felt as intimate to the audiences as it did to her. The second podcast we'll look at today is Bear Brook by Jason Moon. This podcast delves into a cold case murder where he questions the validity of the events. I'll be focusing on the ethics of the narrator, his invasiveness, and how it exploits the murder itself. I'll refer to Jason Moon as Moon, and Jason Carroll, the murderer, as Jason, to prevent confusion. The story begins with Moon involved. The first spoken sentence includes personalized language. This then transitions into talking about the stories themselves in a detached manner. He then returns to the story as an involved narrator. Personal language lingers throughout, and he also adds his thoughts on the case. As he is investigating, he also explores what he personally does. This is similar to the framing of the last podcast, where Diane acted involved in the story, but still explains elements detached, like the surroundings. His personal connection to the story is an issue on occasion. For example, he tries to summarize the thoughts of Karen and people as if they were simplistic characters. Connie's response to people claiming it might have never happened that way she was told is a feeling of disgust. Justifiable, I would say. After this, Moon chimes in. Connie aims that disgust at Jason Carroll. Although a simple sentence, what can this tell us about the narrator and his ethics? Here, Connie is distraught. Her thoughts and feelings towards this whole matter are complex. She had this narrative for years, and now Jason denies it. She is a victim here. Jason is a charged murderer. She decides to speak as if talking to Jason, so Moon is technically true in his summarization. The concern here is what he added to the interview. It frames the latter part very differently from how it was spoken. Without his addition, you visualize a woman standing up for a deceased friend. With the new context, Connie sounds like an instigator, aiming her disgust towards someone. You can visualize Connie above Jason, with him huddled into a corner. Just from this section alone, the narrator has warped how the interview is framed. Why has the narrator decided to frame this person as innocent, rather than seeing how her hearing this has forced her to revisit something horrific in her mind? The new context forces you to see it as irrational. There are also elements where the music starts bright and cheerful and then changes into a depressing tone with the mention of a murder. It does feel exploitative. Music is not needed here. Adding music makes it feel as if her death was a turning point in a fictional story, when it's entirely true. It doesn't even cut off once the interview extracts begin, exploiting those involved for cheap emotional impact. This continues throughout. Moon has also managed to give general audiences the ability to dehumanize the murderer and those involved. His webpage. It includes evidence and timelines of the murder and relevant information, charts and diagrams, pictures of the people involved. This takes away the fact these are people living in real life. It gives audiences the ability to come to their own separate conclusions, separate from podcasts. That's harmful and incredibly dangerous. There are many people online in the true crime fanbase who would transform this information into wild theories or harass people involved for more info. This ignores ethical considerations. The people doing it would likely take fun out of piecing together a puzzle, neglecting that Sharon was murdered and we are speaking of a real incident. Overall, it's clear that Moon didn't consider the consequences and ethics of covering this topic the way that he did. The last one we have is a drama podcast, which I personally enjoyed a lot. The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by the BBC. This had lots of people behind it, with a massive cast to bring it together. It investigates the disappearance of a young man. He was locked in an asylum room with no exits. I'll be focusing on how it combines voice, sound, and narrative to captivate its audience. The opening narration is something not normally spoken about with podcasts, but the way they do it here is fascinating. They start by directly talking to the audience, in particular, you. I urge you. You can find it. They then talk to you about the financing of the podcast. They would prefer not to have adverts to break up the podcast. This would appeal to audiences who prefer binge content, and it would also allow you to be on the move whilst listening to the podcast, with no worry of being taken out of the immersion. They also make you feel like you're unearthing the story alongside the host, the narrative unfolds in pieces, allowing audiences to piece it together whilst the narrator is telling it to us. They also tell the thoughts of the audience back to them in places, like, "It's strange." The sound design is very good, likely due to it being a BBC production. The music adds a feeling of mystery, and you can understand origin points of sound. For example, a news alert would be coming from a TV radio. Or radio. So they would have to echo that sound quality, and they did that here successfully. Also, when the music does eventually cut out, the audience must linger for a bit for its reason. He murdered a woman, and then there's the punch.